Good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well wherever you're watching from. And today, we need to talk about something that goes far beyond headlines, beyond celebrity, beyond royal titles. Because this is about children, accountability, and the digital world shaping an entire generation. Prince Harry walked into a Los Angeles courtroom, stood beside grieving families, and said words that cut through the noise. "None of you should be here." That wasn't a rehearsed soundbite. That wasn't political theater. That was a direct acknowledgement of something deeply broken. Because no parent should have to sit in a courtroom arguing that a social media platform played a role in their child's death. Yet, that is exactly what is happening in Los Angeles County Superior Court right now, in a landmark civil trial against Meta, the parent company of Instagram, and Google, which owns YouTube. The families bringing this lawsuit allege that these platforms were not neutral tools, but were intentionally engineered to maximize engagement in ways that exploit psychological vulnerabilities, particularly in young users. Their attorneys have described Instagram and YouTube as addiction machines, arguing that features like infinite scrolling, algorithm-driven recommendations, autoplay video, push notifications, streak systems, and algorithmic reinforcement loops were designed not just to serve content, but to keep users hooked for as long as possible. And why? Because in the modern digital economy, attention is currency. The longer a user stays, the more advertisements they see. The more advertisements they see, the more revenue the platform generates. That is the economic engine behind social media. The plaintiffs argue that their children were drawn into escalating cycles of harmful content, particularly related to depression, body image struggles, and other distressing material, and that once the algorithms detected engagement with that type of content, they amplified it, feeding more of the same, deepening the spiral. This case is being described as a bellwether trial, meaning its outcome could influence hundreds, possibly thousands, of similar lawsuits across the United States. If the jury finds in favor of the families, it could open the door to sweeping legal consequences for tech giants and potentially force structural changes in how platforms are designed, especially for minors. Meta and Google strongly deny the allegations. They argue that social media is not clinically defined as an addiction, that mental health challenges are complex and influenced by numerous factors, including family environment, genetics, and offline experiences, and that they have implemented safety features over time, such as parental controls, content moderation systems, reporting tools, and screen time reminders. They maintain that correlation does not equal causation, and that they cannot be held legally responsible for individual tragedies. And it is true that mental health is complex. It is also true that millions of young people use social media without catastrophic outcomes. But complexity does not erase design choices. Infinite scroll did not appear by accident. Autoplay was not a glitch. Algorithmic amplification was not a coincidence. These features were deliberately built and refined to increase engagement time. Former tech insiders have publicly acknowledged that early platform design leveraged vulnerabilities in human psychology, using intermittent reward systems similar to those found in gambling mechanics. When users receive unpredictable bursts of likes, comments, or new content, dopamine pathways are activated in the brain, reinforcing behavior and encouraging repeated checking. In adults, that can create habit loops. In children and teenagers whose brains are still developing impulse control and emotional regulation systems, those loops may be even more powerful. That is central to the plaintiff's argument. They claim that companies understood these dynamics, yet continued optimizing for engagement without sufficiently prioritizing safety for young users. Internal research, disclosed in previous investigations, showed that Meta's own studies found Instagram could worsen body image issues for some teenage girls. Those revelations sparked global concern and congressional hearings. Now, similar concerns are being scrutinized under oath in a courtroom. Prince Harry's presence at the trial is not random. For years, he and Meghan Sussex have focused on mental health advocacy and digital safety through the Archwell Foundation. They have supported initiatives addressing online harm, misinformation, and youth well-being. Harry has spoken openly about his own experiences with media intrusion and psychological strain. So when he stands beside families who believe algorithmic amplification contributed to their children's suffering, it aligns with a consistent theme in his public work: accountability and protection in media environments. When he told those parents, "None of you should be here," he was acknowledging that the burden of confronting billion-dollar corporations should not fall on grieving families. Critics may argue he is inserting himself into American legal matters. Others may accuse him of grandstanding. But visibility changes conversations. When someone with global recognition shows up, cameras follow, headlines follow, public scrutiny intensifies, and corporate behavior often shifts under sustained scrutiny. History shows that industries sometimes resist accountability until forced by legal action. There was a time when tobacco companies denied links between cigarettes and cancer. There was a time when car manufacturers resisted mandatory safety features. Legal challenges, investigative journalism, and public advocacy eventually drove reform. The comparison is not perfect, but the pattern of corporate defense, emphasizing complexity, denying direct causation, highlighting consumer choice, feels familiar to many observers. This trial also sits within a broader global debate. Governments worldwide are wrestling with how to regulate digital platforms whose reach spans continents. The EU has implemented the Digital Services Act to increase platform accountability. The UK has passed the Online Safety Act, aimed at protecting minors from harmful online content. In the United States, lawmakers have repeatedly questioned tech executives about youth mental health impacts. But legislation often moves slowly, entangled in political negotiation and constitutional constraints. Courtrooms can move differently. If this trial establishes that platforms bear legal responsibility for design choices that foreseeably harm minors, it could accelerate regulatory reform. It could push companies to redesign algorithms, implement stricter age verification systems, introduce stronger default protections for young users, and submit to independent audits of recommendation engines. On the other hand, if the companies prevail, the debate will not disappear. It will shift arenas. Lawmakers may pursue new statutes. Advocacy groups may intensify campaigns. Researchers will continue studying the effects of prolonged social media use on adolescent mental health. The jury in this case will have to navigate complex evidence. Expert witnesses will debate whether social media qualifies as addictive in a clinical sense. Data scientists will explain how recommendation algorithms function. Psychiatrists will discuss risk factors for depression and anxiety. Lawyers will argue about foreseeability, duty of care, and product liability standards. There are also constitutional questions. Tech companies often argue that algorithmic recommendations constitute protected speech under the First Amendment, complicating liability. The legal terrain is intricate, but beneath the technical arguments lies a simple human question. What responsibility do companies have when their products are used by children? The families in this case are not arguing that social media should not exist. They're arguing that design choices matter, that when companies know minors are using their platforms, those platforms should be structured with protective guardrails rather than purely engagement-driven incentives. Prince Harry's involvement amplifies that message. He has repeatedly emphasized that technology is not inherently harmful, but must be developed and governed responsibly. His advocacy suggests that innovation without ethical boundaries can create unintended harm. By standing with these families, he reinforces the idea that corporate power must be matched with accountability. The attention economy treats human focus as a commodity. In that system, children represent long-term value because habits formed early can extend for decades. That reality intensifies ethical concerns. Should engagement metrics outweigh safety considerations? Should platforms default to protective settings for minors rather than requiring parents to navigate complex menus? Should there be transparent reporting on how often algorithms recommend harmful content to young users? These are not abstract policy questions. They affect real families. In the courtroom, parents recount stories of behavioral changes, emotional withdrawal, escalating online consumption, and the difficulty of competing with algorithmic systems engineered to be endlessly compelling. Listening to such testimony is painful. It forces society to confront uncomfortable truths about digital life. Prince Harry's words, "None of you should be here," carry weight because they recognize that the burden should not be on grieving parents to prove harm after tragedy strikes. Prevention should be the goal. The digital world is not optional for today's youth. School assignments, friendships, entertainment, identity exploration all unfold online. That reality increases the obligation on companies that build these spaces. Tech executives are expected to testify, defending their company's efforts and outlining steps taken to improve safety. They will point to content moderation investments, AI detection systems, and partnerships with mental health organizations. The jury will assess credibility, intent, and evidence. Regardless of the verdict, this trial marks a turning point. The era of unchecked tech expansion without serious accountability is ending. Public awareness has grown. Research has advanced. Parents are asking sharper questions. Policymakers are drafting stricter proposals. Advocates are demanding transparency. Prince Harry's presence underscores that this is not fringe activism. It is a mainstream reckoning about how powerful digital infrastructures shape developing minds. It is easy to dismiss celebrity involvement. It is harder to dismiss grieving families telling their stories under oath. At its core, this case challenges the assumption that growth and engagement should be the primary metrics of success for platforms used by minors. It asks whether well-being should carry equal, if not greater, weight. It asks whether companies should proactively design against harm rather than react after public scandals. It asks whether children deserve a digital environment built with care rather than optimized solely for profit. These questions will not vanish when the gavel falls. They will echo in legislative chambers, boardrooms, and living rooms worldwide. Prince Harry's standing beside these families sends a message that accountability in the digital age is not optional. Innovation must coexist with responsibility. Power must be balanced with protection, and children must not become collateral damage in the race for engagement metrics. As this trial continues, testimony will unfold, evidence will be scrutinized, and arguments will intensify. The outcome remains uncertain, but one thing is clear. A conversation that once simmered on the sidelines is now front and center in a courtroom, backed by grieving parents and amplified by a global figure willing to stand beside them. None of you should be here. Those words capture the heart of the matter. No parent should be forced into legal battle to seek accountability for systems that shape their child's daily life. The digital world is here to stay. The question is whether society will insist that it be built and governed with the well-being of its youngest users at the forefront. That is what this trial represents. That is why it matters, and that is why the world is watching.